Hello. The Divine Code reading for March 21st, pages 575 and 576. And we're beginning in page 574 and doing topic number 9, which is dealing with purchasing stuff at a retail store. Topic number 9. Regarding objects designated for sale, that is merchandise in a store, or such as merchandise in a store, for which the manner of payment is known and recognized by the merchant and customers, it is permitted to take this merchandise and pay for it in the accepted manner, even though the merchant who sells it is not present and is unaware at the time. So somebody owns product at a store, but he's not at the store at the time, or he's in a different part of the store and there's transactions that are going on. The owner doesn't have to actually be there. The store can be functioning in the normal manner of a store. And the owner doesn't have to be there to actually do every transaction. And it's considered a valid transaction even if the owner is not there, as long as it's done in the proper manner. This is not considered theft. That is of the type that was described above. That was when the person would take something and then pay for it, but it was not a retail item. It was just his neighbor's product or something, and he decided he wanted it, so he just paid the neighbor the correct value or even more than the correct value for the item. That's not considered a proper purchase because it was not for sale. The owner did not desire to sell it. In this case, the retail store, the owner does desire to sell it. If it is the desire and agreement of the owner, for example, in some stores, a buyer takes merchandise and places payment money in a box prepared by the owner, even when the owner and his workers are not in the store. Or the owner may appoint his employees to collect payment from the customers. So it could be that you have an employee there, and that's normal for an employee, has a cash register. It's normal for the employee to oversee the transaction. And there are places where it's on the honor system, and there's a box there, and the people put the money for the product in the box, and that's considered proper also. Therefore, it is permitted to take such merchandise and pay for it with money through a second person who is trusted and reliable in the eyes of the owner. And this is not considered theft because he has not acted secretly and the second person is aware of the transaction. In regard to transferring a purchase payment to a merchant through his employee, we may say that the hand of the employee is like the hand of the employer. And therefore, the employer, the merchant, acquires the money as soon as the employee receives it. This is explained in Tractate Bava Metzia 10a in Shulchan Kosher Mishpat 273. So within Jewish law, within rabbinic law or Torah law, there is a lot that goes into the question of acquisition. What is it that makes property transferred from one person to another? If it be money or if it be the merchandise, whatever it is, what are the conditions involved in the transfer of property? So the new person now owns, the old person no longer owns it, and now the new person does own it. And that's of course, very important in the laws of theft. So an employee who's designated as such has a status where he, when the employee takes the money and hands the person the product, that's considered a proper transaction. at that point, and the transaction is at the transaction of the property from one owner to another. But the transfer of a purchase payment to a Gentile merchant through someone who is not his employee seems to be dependent on whether a Gentile can appoint a legally binding emissary. So this is within the Torah law for Jews. There's this concept of an emissary, a shliach, who represents the person. And within Jewish law, the shliach there's lots of things that go on with the shliach, and everything from making transactions, making contracts, doing activities, and that certain activities a shliach can do, and it's an important area of Jewish law, and it goes into the concept of all the Jewish people are each other's fellow. There's a camaraderie that exists within Torah law concerning Jews. It doesn't necessarily correspond the same way in Torah law for Gentiles. A Gentile is not on the same level considered a fellow of each other. Therefore, the question would be, to what extent can a third party can a third party complete the transaction? Or would it have to, maybe they can oversee something that has been completed when the owner and the purchaser finalize the transaction, or does a third party actually create the transaction? And that's a question that's still open to debate. We're not exactly sure how that's going to play out. In any event, it appears clearly a Gentile merchant can receive payment through a trusted friend who is not his employee. And disregarding the subject of appointing emissaries, it is because the merchant obviously will consent to this trusted friend will receive payment for him. So it's not just a passerby on the street or someone like that's creating the transaction. And this is a case where it's in a retail store, and the owner is busy with another customer, and somebody decides that they're gonna help the owner out, even though he's not an employee and he's not a trusted friend. But in that case, in Jewish law, it might, the way it's being described here, it might be valid. In non-Jewish law, if it's not a trusted friend, it's not an employee, and it's not the owner, then it would be problematic if somebody that the owner just asks, hey, can you help me out for a few minutes, whether or not that person can complete the transaction. But if it's a trusted friend, then there's a camaraderie already established, just like there's a to a certain extent with the employee, where that would allow the transaction to be completed by the trusted friend as well as the employee, but not necessarily by a less than a associate that's just a third party. That the associate would be still open to question. Even if one would say that by Torah law, the merchant has not yet acquired the money, and therefore, for example, a merchant can still retract the sale as long as the money was not entered in by his hand. Nevertheless, there is no issue of theft involved, since the merchant consents and trusts the process. So the issue involved is not on the buyer. The buyer is doing everything in an honest manner, and the third party person is also doing everything in an honest manner. The question is, at what point is the transaction completed? Before the transaction is completed, then either party could back out of a transaction. For example, you buy a car, there might be or the person signs loans on a car, and then they have a day or so to retract. A lot of states have that. A person could At the point that the person is able to retract his sale, the transaction is not 100% completed. But once it's completed, then the person would not be able to retract the sale. So the question is, at what point does that change occur? And that's what we're looking at. So if the employee or the trusted friend does the transaction on behalf of the owner, that would cause it the transfer of ownership right at that point. The third party associate would not necessarily at that point, but it would not be a question of theft. Even if the buyer paid for and took the merchandise without the merchant knowing, this is explained by Rabbi Akiva Eger on Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat, chapter 359, and other sources. Likewise, it is not considered robbery because the owner willingly allows it. This is referring to a transaction conducted specifically in a public manner. But it's forbidden to do such things secretly in a manner resembling theft, since it may accustom a person to making transactions regularly in a secretive manner and lead him to committing real theft. See Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat 359-2 and Shach there. Shulchan Aruch Harav, Laws of Robbery, topic 2. These sources explain that there is permission to take merchandise through paying a middleman without the merchant knowing, but only when the transaction is made honestly and openly. So we want to make sure that this activity is being done it's being done openly. We're not making deals in the alley behind the store. If we're making deals in the alley behind the store with an employee or with an associate, that can be a serious problem because we don't know for sure if it's being done in an honest way. And it makes it very easy because the next time, even if it's a proper transaction and it's done in a secretive manner, like in the alley behind the store, then it might make it easier in the future for it to be done in an improper manner, in a pilfering manner, with that way. So we don't want to create a scenario where it's easy for people to slide into actual theft. We want to make it open and an honest and open transaction in front of everybody and in front of right out in the store where it's supposed to be done, because that creates a discipline that keeps people honest. However, if a person took merchandise with the intention of paying for it, but then without permission, he did not pay for it immediately, this is theft and it is forbidden. It is clear that the rule above, the first paragraph in topic 9, that's the one we're studying now, specifically applies only when this is satisfactory to the merchant. But it can be assumed that the merchant would not want someone to take merchandise from his store in order to pay later without his permission. For until he receives money, he would not consent, and he is not interested in running after the person for the money he is owed, as explained in Sefer Mariat Inayim 359-8. So there are some stores that would have a tab. They have they keep a ledger, and when a person buys something, they're buying it on credit, and it's set up ahead of time by the store. And the merchant, the owner, is the one who sets this up. There are stores that operate that way. It's not normal in today's society, but that can exist. In that case, then an employee would be allowed to write down what the person owes, what the person purchased, and what he owes. Or if it's set up that it's a Everyone trusts each other. The buyer could just write down what he got and what he's going to owe, and then when the prearranged time, that's where they extend credit at the prearranged time, it's supposed to be, it's paid for, and that's a lot of businesses actually, well, commercial businesses operate that way. Normal retail stores not necessarily, but commercial businesses often operate where their customers have a line of credit. So if it's prearranged and everything's set up and the owner is part of it, then that would be allowed. But the buyer cannot choose to do that on his own. If he doesn't have a line of credit with the retailer, with the owner, then the buyer needs to pay for it up front. Similarly, if a person takes an item and pays back money without the merchant's awareness in a manner inconsistent with the merchant's original intention of how the item will be sold, such an act would be forbidden as a manner of theft, similar to a person who steals with the intention to pay back later, as explained in topic 6, since he is acting secretively. Furthermore, it may accustom him to paying at a later date without permission, which is actual theft. So if you have a retail store that, there's a long line, the guy doesn't want to wait 10 minutes or whatever or even 5 minutes waiting in line. He's got $5 worth of merchandise. He takes a $5 bill, he puts it over by the cash register. He figures, okay, I paid for it, and he walks out. That's similar. That makes it easier for him the next time to decide, well, I'll just pay for it when I come back. And that it's a slippery slope. It's best to do it the way. Now, if the merchant allows people to do that, allows people to take the money, put it next to the cash register, and walk out the store. If the merchant allows that, then it's fine. But if the merchant expects people to go through the line and pay for the product in the normative manner, then a person needs to do that. Otherwise, we cannot operate outside of the system that's set up by the owner for buying things. It appears that it is forbidden to take merchandise and leave a prepared check as payment without permission, because the owner does not wish to receive checks in the same way he anticipates to be paid with cash. In regard to leaving one's credit card information for payment, this would depend on the individual business. Some businesses consistently or at some times consider a credit card payment as equivalent to cash or even better than cash. The deciding factor is the policy of the merchant. Okay, so there's different ways that people pay. That's normal in today's business practices. Paying for cash, usually that's considered cash. You're paying with cash. That's the most preferred manner for most people. But depending upon the owner, maybe the owner doesn't want to deal with cash. Maybe he doesn't want to get robbed, or just doesn't want to have a bunch of cash laying around. It's a hassle. He wants to have it directly done through the banks. He may allow checks if he trusts. There's a lot of problems with people writing fake checks, so merchants often try to avoid that today. But maybe he's fine with checks. If everyone knows each other, they trust each other, then they could use checks. And he may prefer that. Or he may prefer credit cards or debit cards. There's difficulties with all these systems. One is the cash. You may not want a bunch of cash sitting around the store. Or the checks, there may be a concern about the checks bouncing. Or credit cards, there's a fee involved. Credit cards and debit cards, there's a fee involved that the merchant winds up paying for, and it becomes part of his business expense. There's the benefit to each one of them. Cash, the benefit is that it's actually, you got the money. Checks, the benefits is it makes it easy for people, and there's usually not a fee involved. And credit cards, even though there's a fee involved, the money is transacted electronically very easily, and some merchants would prefer that. They would actually prefer people to pay with credit cards. Some don't. So it depends upon the policy of the merchant. It depends upon the policy of the owner of the store that owns all the product in the store and how he wants to transact the business. And we have to make sure that we're following that. We can't just take a check, hand it to the guy, and he doesn't want a check. He never seen the person before. He's had difficulty with checks in the past, and the merchant just doesn't want the check, and then someone hands him a check. If that's not the policy, then that's not considered a proper transaction. Tirema Kosher Mishpat 2051, regarding the case of one who put under duress until he sold an item. Such a sale is only valid when the payment is in cash, and certainly not with an IOU, since not everyone relies upon IOUs in the same way. So an IOU might be similar to a check, or in the days before people would, in the olden days when people would make a carbon copy of the credit card number and assume that once it gets to the bank, it's going to be valid. If they're under duress, someone's really leaning on the merchant to sell the product. The merchant doesn't want to sell that product. It's the display item, and he sold out of the product. There's one display item left. He doesn't want to sell the display item because he'll have to put together another one, and that's a hassle. But someone keeps hassling him, so he decides, okay, I'll sell you the display item, and that only works. That's only valid if it's done in a manner that the merchant allows. And normally that would be cash in such a case. It is obvious that the buyer is not allowed to leave his own merchandise or belongings without permission as payment for the merchandise he is buying, because the seller wants money as payment, not other items. So someone is he's got his own, he's a traveling salesman. He's got his own merchandise. He decides, okay, I'm going to trade off this merchandise, and the owner of the store doesn't want it, then it's not a valid transaction. Only if the owner of the store agreed to the transaction, he actually needs the product, he could sell it at a markup, he's happy. In that case, it would be permitted. But if it's not something he wants, and it can't be done without the owner's awareness, it has to be that the owner agrees to it. However, if it is known that the owner agrees to certain methods of means of payment, by receiving a check with specific items in exchange for the sold merchandise, then it is permissible. It appears that if the merchant trusts the check or a friend, or knows the buyer is a trustworthy person, then even if he does not usually accept checks from an unknown person who comes into the store, it is permissible for the trusted buyer to take the merchandise without the merchant's knowledge and leave a check, since for this person, the merchant considers his checks as good as cash, and the merchant is presumably happy with the sale. So in that type of a case, the owner, if he accepts the check, that's basically similar to accepting a line of credit. If the check is for $100, that means he's extending a line of credit to the buyer for $100 until the check clears the bank and everything's fine. Then that's considered payment of the line of credit. And if the owner trusts the person with that line of credit, then fine. If the owner doesn't trust someone with a line of credit, then he doesn't have to accept then he would not accept the check from the person. And depending upon the country or state, that the local government rules as to ways of chasing down people who write bounce checks, it varies, but it depends upon the comfort of the owner, how he wants to how he wants to run his business. And the buyer needs to operate within the comfort zone of the owner. And if he takes it upon himself to go outside of the comfort zone, it might not be considered a proper transaction, and it may even go into the area of being considered theft. So buyers need to be very cautious to operate within the bounds of the merchant. Thank you.